Well, good evening, and thank you for joining us. As most of you know, Brian, myself, and Brother Jimmy, we are out of town the next few days, and so we're going to be gone to a conference, just having the opportunity to get our cup filled and hear some great preaching, some teaching, and learning some things. Maybe we can come back and implement within the different ministries that the three of us serve in. And so be praying for us as we're traveling and traveling back and forth. And so we're going to continue on in our Bible study that we started actually last week. And if you remember, we're going to be doing the questions and calling it the Questions series. And a lot of that relies on you guys in providing questions and providing me with maybe just questions that you have about your personal faith, questions that you have about maybe there's something in Scripture that you don't understand, or you've heard someone talk about, and you're just like, man, I don't know the answer to that question. Whatever those may be. Maybe it's a doctrinal question, a theological question. And I started the series off last week and with the question of evil and suffering and God. How does all that fit? If evil exists and suffering exists, then how can God exist? Or then the same question is that if God is a true omnipotent and omniscient God, then how can evil and suffering then exist? And so we looked at a lot of information last week. We're going to try to finish this up this week, and then we'll be able to move on to some of the questions that you guys have. I've already had some turned in, and so if you have those questions, what we're asking you to do is submit those online. You can email those to the church. They come directly to me, or if you want to write them down on a card or a piece of paper, you can place those in our offering boxes at the back of the sanctuary on Sundays, because we're going to be going through this study for the next several weeks. I'm going to be answering these questions that you have. And so let's dive in to our study that we're going to continue on from last week, and evil, suffering, and God, and how do they all fit in together. And as we were ending last week, I ended with this kind of statement question that says if, and huge emphasis on if we have the right, or had the right, to shake our fist at God because of all the things that are wrong in the world, then to be consistent, we then also would need to run and embrace God every time that something great and something good happens in the world and in our life as well. If we're going to be consistent in blaming God for things that happen, then we also need to be consistent in the fact that we run to Him and embrace Him every time something good and wonderful and great and amazing happens as well. And so we left last week with that statement, but I want to kind of take it a little farther in the fact that there are so many people that struggle through pain. They struggle through evil things that have happened in their life, catastrophes that have happened in their life, just terrible circumstances, situations that have happened in their life. And I will just tell you personally in a very vulnerable way that there are people that have experienced things and tragedies far greater than anything that I have ever experienced in my own personal life. And so I don't pretend to know exactly everything that everyone goes through and how they feel about all of those things. But I want us to look at this from a biblical standpoint, but I also want to look at this as trying to answer that question of how does all of this fit together, and what's the purpose of it, and those kind of things. But I want us to imagine, so we all know that there's evil in the world, there's suffering in the world, there's pain in the world, there's just all those different things that happen. And I want us to first then imagine a world without pain. Imagine a life without pain. Imagine a world without pain. And I'm talking about a life like this, a world like this. I'm not talking about eternity. I'm talking about a world like this. Imagine a world with no pain. And this kind of fits very or kind of hits very close to home for me. So imagine smashing your finger and you don't feel pain. About a year and a half ago, I was out in my wood shop and I was building a table and I was, not being very smart, and I was holding something very still and trying to get it hammered in, and I needed one more good shot to get it done, and I knew I was going to have to hit it hard, and so I did. And when I swung, it hit just the edge of the bolt that I was hitting and ricocheted off and caught my thumb, and it ended up crushing my thumb. In fact, it ended up crushing the tip of my thumb and about the bones in there, about 6 different pieces, and just kind of blew out the end of my thumb. And so I immediately felt pain, but I thought to myself, imagine a world without pain. Imagine being able to smash your finger without feeling pain. And most of us, that if you've ever done anything like that, you're thinking, man, that actually sounds pretty good. But there's actually a medical condition. It's called cognitive insensitivity, that actually they don't feel pain. People literally do not feel pain. They break a bone, they don't know it. They bite down on their tongue, they don't know it. I mean, they literally go through life without feeling without any kind of pain. And there is a drawback. I mean, a lot of us think, we don't like pain. We don't like to feel pain. Most of the time, we're trying to get rid of pain. But people with this particular kind of condition, they rarely even reach adulthood. And if in the rare instance they reach adulthood, most of the time they come down with an illness that they don't even know that they have until it's too late, and then they end up passing on, and that illness ends up taking their life. Now, I do agree, none of us enjoy pain, none of us love pain. In fact, most of us would do just about anything that we could do to alleviate pain, and we take medicine. Every time we're in pain, we're trying. When that pain happens, we're trying to do everything that we can to make the pain stop. But I want us to understand that pain, whether it's physical pain, emotional pain, spiritual pain is actually a good thing. Pain is like an alarm system for our body. It's an alarm system for our mind. Alarm system. It's telling us that something is wrong. And when we oftentimes try to silence or snooze that pain alarm, but I want us to understand that without that alarm, we don't know that anything's wrong. We don't know that there's anything that's going on. And so lacking that pain alarm in mine and your life, whether it's a physical, emotional, spiritual, whatever kind of pain that may be, without that alarm, it would be catastrophic, not only to us as an individual, but it would be catastrophic to mankind in general. And so pain in itself is actually somewhat of a good thing. And so if we try to imagine this world without pain, then we have to understand that here are the realities of a world without pain. Is that children would rarely live to adulthood. Adults would die off faster than they do already. Civilization as we know it currently would not exist. I mean, it would not be anything like we know it. In fact, the human race would probably, at this particular point in time, would probably be completely extinct. We would not be in existence any longer if we lived in this world without pain. What about this? And I want us to imagine, what about a world where everyone was invincible, right? So we can't get hurt. It's not that we don't feel pain and we can get hurt, but we just don't feel the pain. But what about living in a world where people are just invincible? There's no death, there's no pain, there's no hunger, there's nothing like that that's going on. I mean, everybody's just invincible. I mean, we think about looking over in third world countries where people are starving to death and we see, massive amounts of disease because of lack of nutrition, and we see all of that. And so living in this world where everyone is invincible, right? We think, those of you that are Marvel or DC nerds, you would think, man, that would be cool. I mean, everybody's got superpowers and everybody's invincible. They can't die and they don't feel pain and they don't hunger and they don't do all these different things. And so we would think to ourselves, man, that sounds like utopia, right? That sounds like the perfect world to live in. But living in a world where everyone is invincible would be that a world without morals. It would be a world without moral. I mean, that would be whether it's anything that is morally good, whether there's anything that's morally evil or bad. And when there's a world that exists like that where there's no evil, there's no moral value, then there's no virtue. In other words, there's no meaning in life. So if we imagine these two worlds where we don't feel pain or everyone is invincible, there's this point to where either mankind becomes extinct or mankind then has no moral value. There's no way to measure this moral value because there's no death. I mean, you don't have to worry about dying. You don't have to worry about hunger. You don't have to worry about pain. You don't have to worry about any of those kind of things. And in reality, it would probably just be extremely horrific in how everyone would react and act. I mean, because you can't die. So if you think about living in this world where you can't die, then people are going to try to do things that they've never done before, and people are going to try to invent new ways to do things. And so imagine in these kind of worlds that there's no pain or there's everyone is invincible, and in a world where one cannot do evil, also in a world where one cannot do good. And so if we remove evil and we remove suffering from the world, so if we imagine living in this world where none of those things exist, then we also have to live in a world where there's no good. And so it's this moral compass in which that we exist in that tells us what is good and what is evil, or what is good and what is bad. And so I want to look at three different things here for just a second. Three major views of evil in the world. So these are three major. These are not the only. Okay, there's several subcategories that come off of this, but these are three major views of evil that are in the world. So the first one is this, and so we're going to call it logic. It's the logical problem of evil. The logical problem of evil. And it claims this. It claims that there is a contradiction in believing that God and evil can coexist. So the logical problem of evil claims that there's a contradiction in believing that God and evil can coexist. And then, so the second one is this. It is the evidential problem of evil. In this particular viewpoint, it says they claim that evil gives strong evidence that God does not exist. And so it's not as far as the logical where it says that they both can exist. Evidential says that there's evidence that shows that it's probable that God doesn't exist. So then we move into the third view, which is gratuitous, is the gratuitous problem of evil. And this is where it says that evil is evil that God allows into the world to bring about a greater good, or it could even prevent an even worse evil on down the line. So we were actually talking in our small group last night that and this would kind of be somewhat of an example of this particular view of gratuitous problem of evil, is that, have you ever been driving down the road and then all of a sudden, traffic comes to just a complete stop, you have a blowout, or, your car won't start when you try to get it and get it in to go and try to go somewhere, and it delays your time in wherever it is that you're trying to get to. And a lot of times we get frustrated, we get angry, we're always in a hurry, we're always wanting to get from here to there and get there as fast as we can. And so the thought in this, or the example in this, would be that the evil of the car not starting, or having a blowout on the way, or traffic has come to a complete halt, now it's delayed your trip another 30 minutes. And so the example is that because of that delay, kept you from facing a worse evil on down the road, to where you could have had a major car accident, or you could have, something more catastrophic could have taken place on down the road. But because of the first evil, it prevented an even greater evil on down the road. And so that's the belief there of the gratuitous problem of evil. And then I want to look at two major types of evil that exist in the world. And this is really what we're going to focus a lot on tonight. And the first one is natural evil. Natural evil. Natural evil is this. It is evil that is referred to as pain and suffering caused by natural process. And then we have the second one, is what we would call moral evil, which is the wicked acts of morally irresponsible people. And so we have natural evil and we have moral evil. And so I want to talk to us just a minute about natural evils. Natural evils would be something like this. On December 26 of 2004 in Indonesia, when a tsunami came and a large earthquake happened underneath the sea, and a tsunami came and killing over 230,000 people in 14 different countries. This would be an example of a natural evil. Or in January 12th of 2010 in Haiti, an earthquake, a 7.0 magnitude, killed over 300,000 people. Another 300,000 more were injured, and over 1 million people left homeless out of that one earthquake incident. Or in March 11th in 2011 in Japan, an earthquake measuring the magnitude of a 9.0 under the sea, causing a tsunami, comes in and kills over 16,000 people, with another 3,200 people left missing. Or we think about the AIDS epidemic that has taken place in just South Africa alone, of killing over 25 million people. And so the argument that typically comes from this is that how could a God that is an omnipotent God, an omniscient God, and that means an all-powerful God, an all-knowing God, and then an omnibenevolent God, an all-loving God, how could a God like that just sit back and do nothing while all of these natural disasters take place, and hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people are killed in these natural disasters, or even injured, or loss of limbs, or just catastrophic events? And so how could this omnipotent, omniscient, omnibenevolent God, how could he truly just sit back and allow this evil in a natural setting to take place? Why can't he just know, okay, this earthquake is going to take place, or this tsunami is going to take place, or this tornado is going to come through here, this down in our area with hurricanes, this hurricane is going to come through. And so why can't God just, if he foreknows these things, why can't he just snap his finger and all of these things just go away and they don't happen? That way we don't have to worry about people dying and losing lives and catastrophic events taking place. And it's a great question. And it would be this is my answer to this particular question. It's a dynamic world concept. A dynamic world concept. And it would be this. It is nature is constantly changing. And because nature is constantly changing, so then natural disasters take place. So I want to take just for a moment, I want us to go back and look in the book of Genesis, in Genesis chapter 1. And I know that, believe me, as an apologist, I went to school through apologetics, and so I know that there's always arguments, and I know people are going, they can shoot holes in this, and they can shoot holes in that, and they can shoot holes in this, and that's fine, and so there's no possible way in the time frame which we have for me to cover all of the areas in which that I need. But I want to show you something here of this dynamic world in which that God has created. So look here in verse 1, scriptures that everybody's probably familiar with, but it says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was moving over the surface of the waters. And then God said, 'Let there be light,' and there was light. God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from darkness, and God called the light day, and the darkness He called night. And there was evening, and then there was morning one day. And then God said, 'Let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters.' And God made the expanse and separated the waters which were below the expanse from the waters which were from above, and it was so. And then God called the expanse heaven, and there was evening, and then there was morning a second day. And then God said, 'Let the waters below the heavens be gathered into one place, and let the dry land appear.' And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering of the water He called the seas, and God saw that it was good. And then God said, 'Let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit and trees, fruit on the earth, bearing fruit after their kind, and seed in them.' And it was so. And the earth brought forth vegetation, and plants yielding seed after their kind, and trees bearing fruit with seeds in them after their kind. And God saw that it was good. And then there was evening, and then there was morning the third day. And then God said, 'Let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens, and separated the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and for years, and let them be for lights in the expanse of the heaven to give light on the earth.' And so it was. And God made the two great lights, the greater light to be govern the day, and the lesser light to govern the night. And He made the stars also. And God placed them in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth, and to govern the day and the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And then there was evening, and then there was morning in the fourth day. And then God said, 'Let the waters teem with swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth in the open expanse of the heaven.' And God created the great sea monsters and every living creature that moves, in which the water swarmed after their kind, and every winged bird after its kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them, saying, 'Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters and the seas, and let the birds multiply on the earth.' And then it was evening, and then it was morning the fifth day. And then God said, 'Let the earth bring forth living creature after their kind, cattle, creeping things, and beasts of the earth and their kind.' And it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth after their kind, and the cattle after their kind, and everything that creeps on the ground after its kind. And God saw that it was good. And then God said, 'Let us make man in our image, according to our own likeness. And let them rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over the cattle, and over the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth.' And God created man in His own image, and in the image of God He created him, male and female, and He created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, 'Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it, and rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over the living things that move on the earth.' And then God said, 'Behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the surface of all the earth, and every tree which has fruit yielding seed, and it shall be food for you. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the sky, and everything that moves on the earth, and which has life, I have given every green plant for food.' And it was so. And God saw all that He had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning the sixth day." So we see this dynamic world, we see this dynamic earth, this dynamic world concept where things are constantly changing. And all throughout Scripture, we see all kinds of different things that take place through Scripture, through the Old Testament, through the New Testament, and even throughout history. We hear about earthquakes, and we hear about storms and rains and tornadoes, and we hear about all kinds of floods that take place. All throughout Scripture, we see these natural disasters, and all of this is a result of how this dynamic world is shifting and changing, and because of that, natural disasters happen. And that is kind of versus what we would call a static world. And so a static world would be a world that never changes, it never moves, it never does anything, never changes shape, it never twists, never turns, never does any of those kind of things. And so if we lived in this static world, first of all, I would just tell you that we would probably die. And so this dynamic world, because things are constantly in shift and in change, allows all the things that you and I have ever experienced in our life to take place. I mean, just thinking about, we talked about this not long ago, thinking about how that just the fact that the earth is in a constant rotation on its axis. And we just read here in Genesis how that God created the sun and God created the moon, the sun for the day, the moon for the night, created the stars. The earth is set on its axis, and it provides light, it provides heat, it provides all the things that are necessary for us. But I would say this, is that in a static world where nothing changes, parts of the world would either freeze or it would burn to death. And so there's this constant rotation that happens, and if the earth was just moved off of its axis just a few degrees one way or the other, parts of the world would freeze or would burn as well. And so we see this dynamic world that is taking place, that is constantly moving, constantly shifting, and constantly doing all the things that God actually created it to do. And that's where we see that in this dynamic world, that God actually created it to be a dynamic world where it would move and shift and change, and He created it to be that way. And so God cannot. Somebody's asked me this question before years ago, but they asked me, they said, is there something that God cannot do? In fact, I remember who it is now. I remember I had a youth girl, my very first church that we ever served in, I had a youth girl ask me this question. And she said, is there anything that God cannot do? Back then, in my very lack of wisdom, didn't know how to answer the question. And so I told her, I said, I don't think there's anything that God cannot do. And as I've gotten older, and I don't know if I'd say wiser, but as I've gotten older and I've studied through Scripture, there is something that God cannot do. And the one thing that God cannot do is do anything that is contrary to His nature. God cannot do anything that is contrary to His nature. Now, we want to get into all of the physical things. If we want to get into, is there any, one of the questions that was asked by the same young lady, she asked the question, could God make a boulder big enough that He couldn't move? And to me, that's the mind of a child. I mean, that's how the mind of a child works. They want to know these kind of things. And so, but the thing is that God cannot do anything that would be against His nature, or go against His nature. So in other words, like God couldn't commit suicide. God could not break a promise, could not break a covenant, because it would completely go against all of His nature. So if for God not being able to do anything that is contrary to His nature, God cannot do what is logically, I want you to hear this, logically impossible. God cannot do anything that is logically impossible. And so it's impossible for God to make, so it is possible for God to make a dynamic world. Let me re-ask this question because I've messed it up already twice. Is it possible for God to make a dynamic world without natural evils? So if if the result of a dynamic world is that things move and shift, and which causes natural disasters, is it possible for God to make a dynamic world, one that moves and shifts and does all those things, without natural evils? That would go completely against his character. That would go completely against who he is, because he created, and this is why I say this, is because he created it to be a dynamic world which moves and shifts and changes. And because it moves and shifts and changes, we experience natural disasters. We experience natural evils. And so for God to step in and say, I want to create a dynamic world that moves and shifts and change without all the evils that come with it, would be against his nature. So the second thing we want to look at tonight is moral evils. And so what is moral evils? And I think I gave several examples of moral evils a while ago, and gave several examples of natural evil a while ago. I'm going to give just one of moral evil, because I think it's one that is enough. And so from 1941 to 1945, the world experienced what we know as the Holocaust, where 6 million Jews were murdered, along with another 5 to 6 million non-Jews that were murdered as well. And there's debate of so many more that were murdered during that time as well. But this would be an example of what a moral evil is. Moral evil is the corruption of good. And that's what Augustine actually tells us that. In fact, that's the definition which he gives to moral evil, it is the corruption of good. In moral evils, so people ask the question, well, why in the world does moral evil exist? So if we know that people can do horrible and unthinkable things in this world, why does God allow moral evils to exist in a world that he created and said was good? Again, another really good question. And the very simple answer that I'm going to give, I'm going to extend into a little more difficult answer here in just a few moments. But the simple answer is this, is free will. See, is that God allows mankind, when he created all the things in the world and gets to mankind, he created, mankind was the only creation of his that he created to be like him, to be able to have that understanding and that knowledge and that willpower to do what is good. And so God allows us to have free will. And so free will is this, is man's freedom to choose his own will. And so people have asked me oftentimes when you talk about free will, it's like, why would God give mankind free will if he foreknew or if he knows that mankind is going to choose against him? And so my answer to that is that if God did not create mankind with free will, then God would have created just a bunch of robots that would have not had any kind of willpower, any kind of ability to choose for themselves or choose between morally right or morally wrong. And so, man being created by God, I do believe, therefore, man is created good. However, since free will does exist, mankind has been given the option to abuse the good in which that he was created. And if you go back in and look here in Genesis, in the story directly after everything that we just got through reading in chapter 2 and in chapter 3, we see the creation of man, and then God takes man, he creates woman from the rib of man, and they are coexisting together, and man God had given man, free reign of everything in the garden, and he said, you can have anything, you can have everything that you want. It's all been created for you except for the one tree. Don't eat its fruit. And we see that in that in the relationship in which that Adam and Eve had in the garden with God was a perfect relationship. It was a beautiful relationship. They probably the only people in the world that have ever existed outside of Jesus that actually walked with God, talked with God, more than likely in some form of a perfect setting where they could see him and they experience him and they could feel him and they would know he was there. He talked with them. He had conversation with them. He had relationship with them and dwelt with them. And even in all of that beauty and all of that glory and all of the majesty in which that Adam and Eve experienced with God, when given the choice to made the wrong choice. This is part of free will, and I know people ask the question all of the time, well, then why did God give us free will? Why do we have free will? What is the purpose of free will? And the purpose of free will is that God knows that if my children are to love me, I want them to choose to love me, not for me to make them love me. Again, that would be the purpose of making robots versus making mankind, is that he could make the robots do whatever he wanted to do, but he wanted to give free will to mankind in order for them to have that ability to choose whether they want to love him, serve him, and adore him or not. I do believe that free will is a wonderful thing in itself, because without free will, without free choice, there is no righteous act that could ever be performed. So without free will, there is no moral compass. Without free will, there is no ability to choose between right and wrong. There is no righteous compass or moral compass in which that we go by. And so free will is a good thing. But free will hinges on two subtle distinctions. And I think this is where so many people, they get hung up in free will, and they get hung up with, the decision of free will and having free will and all those kind of things. And I don't have time to get into all of that. But according to Augustine, and I do have to agree with the statements, I don't agree with everything that he says, but I do agree with the statement in which that he makes here, that free will hinges on two subtle distinctions. The first one is this: it is the having of free will. The having of free will. The second one is this: the exercise of free will. So the having of free will is that mankind obtains free will through the divine nature of God. So the two distinctions that are made within free will is, the first one is having, which mankind has the ability to have free will because it has been given to them by God. They have free will. However, the second one is that the exercising of free will then is this: it is the act in which that mankind takes upon himself to move within that motion of free will. So having free will has been divinely given to us by God, but the exercise of that free will then moves within our own abilities and within our own actions. And so here's where moral evil then begins to exist, is because moral evil is the result of mankind exercising their free will. Exercising their free will apart from the will of God. So we have these earthly desires. I continue to go back to Eve as she's standing in the garden, and the serpent is talking to her. And mind you, the serpent never forced Eve or Adam to ever take a bite of the fruit. And the serpent never technically lied to them either. He just took God's truth and twisted it. And he didn't really lie to them. He put that doubt, he put that question in their mind. And this is where that free will, see, God gave them free will because the reason why we know he gave them free will is he says, listen, you can have everything that you want in this garden, but you can't eat of this tree right here because if you do, you'll die. And so they existed in that garden and existed all around that tree. And then in the moment that they come to the tree, she saw it. Man, it looked good for food. It looked good for taking of it. She knew that God said, listen, if you eat of that tree, you're going to die. And Satan then kind of whispers in her ear and says, but will you really? I mean, is that really what God said? I mean, is that really what he meant? And in that moment, doubt creeped into the mind of mankind and the mind of Eve and the mind of Adam. Doubt then creeped in saying, do I want to be like God or do I want to be for God? And so being for God would have knowing that you had free will, that you obtain free will because God gives it. But exercising that free will is then her partaking of that fruit. So, when we think about moral evil in the world, moral evil falls in line with the fall of man, and it's the action of exercising free will. And the question still comes, and why doesn't God just stop it? Why doesn't God stop that guy entering to the school? Why doesn't God break his finger so that he can't pull the trigger? Why does God allow him to wake up that day? Why doesn't God allow that person that's drinking, why does he allow them to get behind the wheel of that car? And the question, while those are very, very good questions, comes in the fact that God gave us the ability to have free will. But for him to step in and to override the exercising of that free will would again go against his very nature. I want us to look at another option. We'll end with this theory here and then me answering the question I know that probably all of you are waiting for. Let me ask you this. Could the pain and suffering, or at least the majority of pain and suffering, be because not the issue of the circumstance itself that's happening in your life or in the life of someone else? So let me repeat this. Could the pain and suffering, or at least the majority of it, because of not just the issue itself that's happening to us, but rather, could the majority of our pain and suffering be because of our mistaken or irrational beliefs that we hold regarding what is happening to us? Let me give you an illustration. Most of our worst pain is produced in how we mentally and emotionally, spiritually, how we download, how we process the things in which that we're going through, right? So the majority of our unhappiness is induced internally rather than being forced upon us by events or even by other people. Now, I'm not saying, the first thing I want to clarify is I'm not saying that pain and suffering doesn't exist outside of how we process, because it does. I mean, it truly does exist outside of how we process things and how we do things. But, however, how we end up processing the things in which that we go through and how the emotional feelings in which that we have about those things that we're going through increase or could decrease the amount of pain and suffering in which that we will continue to go through. So this would mean that the primary cause of our emotional suffering comes from internal, growing from our own false beliefs. Therefore, rational, true, good beliefs about our reality could produce positive results. And in the same sense, while irrational, false, and bad beliefs about our reality will continue to promote negative results and painful consequences. Now, again, I want to make sure you hear that I'm not saying that events and circumstances and people can't cause horrible things, because they can, and they are painful, and they cause great suffering. But the extension of that suffering also comes from how we download or process the circumstances in which that we go through. Let me see if I can break this down a little more simplistically. Is that if you were to watch something horrific happen, or you were to hear about something horrific that happened, what are our immediate thoughts about that situation? I mean, do we immediately start having horrible thoughts about, why did God allow that to happen? Where was God? Why didn't God do this? Is God on vacation? Is God asleep? Does God not care? And we're starting to ask questions like this. Immediately, it begins to put irrational thoughts and false beliefs in our mind that God doesn't care about who we are and the circumstances in which we're going through, which then causes us then to increase and raise the level chemically in our brain, then emotionally in our body, and then even spiritually within our soul begins to increase and multiply the pain and suffering in which that we're already facing. Whereas, and sometimes I would just tell you, there are those people that they just seem to be positive about every circumstance in the world that goes on. It doesn't matter how horrible, how bad it is. And God bless those people. If you're one of those people, God bless you. But sometimes to people that are what we call negative Nancy's, you're irritating. Just because in those circumstances that, horrible, awful things are happening, and you're like, you know what? God is still on his throne. God is still good. God is still great. And that is the truth. But it's how our mind processes the circumstances in which that we're going through. And if you're one of those negative Nancy's, if you're one of those people that is just negative about every circumstance, you look at the situation from a negative point of view every single time. If you're one of those half-empty glass people, like no matter what you think, your glass is always half empty, then your pain and suffering in life is always going to be multiplied. And all of that is going on internally. Not saying that the circumstance is not painful and suffering in itself, but you're adding to it. Whereas if you're one of those half-full glass people, then no matter what the circumstance, no matter what the situation, my glass is always half full. And I love this analogy because when you're looking at a glass, if it's half empty or whether it's half full, it doesn't matter, because there's the same amount of water in the glass either way. But it's all about your vantage point. It's all about how you view it. It's all about how you see the circumstance that's in front of you. And so that multiplies our pain and suffering. I know, again, most of you are probably saying, okay, you've given us way more information than we probably need, and you're probably right. And so you're asking a question. So what's the answer to the question that we started this whole Bible study off is, evil, suffering, God, how does all that go together? How do they coexist? And so here it goes. And this may not be the answer that you want, but this is the answer in which that I come up with from reading through Scripture and all the studying that I've done. The first part of it goes like this, is that even if I could answer why evil and suffering exist. And then could even fully explain in detail in every instance, along with providing full justification for the evil and suffering to the level of every person's satisfaction. So I'm able to give full explanation, full justification in every individual's instance, and they're satisfied. Suffering will still be suffering, and evil will still be evil. Even if I answered the question, even if we had all the answers to this question, evil's still going to be evil, and suffering is still going to be suffering. But let me give you a little more, because I know you're probably like, oh, that's where he's going to end. I'm not going to end there. So look at it. Pain and suffering and evil, I believe, must be present in the world where moral virtue exists for the possibility of mankind to experience and produce good. And the reason why I say this is because in order for man to be able to do good, which is why God created us to have a relationship with Him, God created us and said it was good, God desires us to do His will, and so God desires us to do good. And so in order for us to be able to do good, there needs to be a moral compass that exists that gives us a level of the ability to do good or to do bad, which we know as, from earlier, as free will. While it might be physically possible for an omnipotent God to snap His fingers and rid evil and suffering, it would go against His character of creating a world and a people with free will, with the ability to freely choose to love Him and to do good, or to choose to deny Him and do evil. For God to snap His fingers and correct all the evil and suffering in the world would entail a much wider range of consequences that would reduce the entire human population and the entire human experience. It would be a world of no meaning and a world of no significance. Like I said, while that may not be the answer in which that you were hoping for, that you wanted, evil and suffering exist in this world because God gave us the ability to have free will, gave us the ability to exercise that free will. And from that ability to exercise that free will, some people choose to do evil, and some people choose to do good. And all of the natural disasters and all of the natural evil that takes place is all part of a dynamic world that's moving and shifting and changing. And the one thing that God cannot do is go against His own nature and His own character. I hope you enjoyed this Bible study. If you have further questions, I do ask you, just come and ask me. Just come and email me or come to the office, whatever it may be. If you have further questions that you have, just for time purposes, we're not able to go into just huge, great detail from an apologetic standpoint, but tried my best to bring about a good, broad, general answer to the question that has been given to me many, many, many times over. And so thank you for joining us, and let me pray for us, and then I hope to see you guys next week. Father, I thank you so much. Thank you for all the things that you do. I thank you that you do love us. And God, while there is evil and while there is suffering that goes on in this world, God, we know that you are still in control. God, we still know that you have a plan, even though that we may not understand that plan. And there are times in this life that we don't even like the plan. God, we still know that you are the one in control of that plan, and you are the one that built that plan and designed that plan, and that you have that plan specifically for us. And so, Father, I pray that we would trust, even when it doesn't make sense. God, I pray that we would trust, even when it hurts. God, I pray that we would trust, even when we don't trust anyone. God, because you are our creator. You are our sustainer. You are our rock, our refuge, and our salvation. And we thank you for that. And we ask all this in the name of Jesus. Amen. Again, I pray that you join us next week, and we'll see you guys then.